Last week, the world once again woke up to a tense day, as alarming news came out of the Middle East. The long-standing tension between Iran and Israel had been escalating for months, eventually reaching the stage of direct confrontation. But this time, the issue extended far beyond just the two countries. After Iran's retaliatory strikes on Israel, the United States officially stepped in. Through a limited yet impactful operation, the U.S. targeted Iran's nuclear infrastructure, and what had been a diplomatic standoff suddenly escalated to a military crisis. Iran, however, wasted no time in responding. Within hours, it launched ballistic missiles at American military bases. While the attacks did not result in casualties, the fact that they targeted U.S. bases, symbols of global dominance, was seen as a powerful psychological message. At least, that's how Iran portrays it. Following the attacks, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, declared on his official X account, "Victory is ours." But is it really? With the announcement of a ceasefire, Iran now claims it is the victorious party. According to the regime's narrative, Iran managed to respond to both Israel and the U.S. simultaneously, maintained its regional influence, and concluded the conflict without facing any imminent regime change threat. The fact that the U.S. refrained from deploying more troops, limited itself to targeted strikes, and ultimately agreed to a ceasefire. This is portrayed by Iranian officials as a strategic triumph. Pro-Iranian media outlets frame the events with a simple message. The U.S. backed down, and the regime survived, preserving its internal stability. However, despite these claims, can this really be considered a victory? It's understandable that a state launching direct missile strikes at the world's greatest superpower might declare itself the winner. But when we analyze the broader geopolitical outcome, the situation looks far more complex. Iran's internal politics remain fragile. Its economy is still crippled by sanctions, and although its nuclear facilities were not completely destroyed, it suffered significant losses, particularly among high-ranking officials, due to Israel's strikes. Furthermore, the attacks did not significantly undermine the United States' global military dominance. Some even interpret this entire confrontation, including Iran's missile response, as a choreographed show, a mutual performance with calculated limits. As for Washington, it didn't tactically retreat. Rather, it stepped back as part of a broader strategic vision. This isn't necessarily a concession. It could be a move within a longer-term geopolitical plan. So, when we consider the situation as a whole, it's difficult to declare this a decisive victory for Iran, but there was a time in history when Iran truly, in every sense of the word, defeated the United States. When did that happen, and how did it unfold? Let's begin the main part of the video. 1979 Iran hostage crisis, the collapse of a superpower. In the autumn of 1979, a world-shaking event took place in Iran. The U.S. Embassy in Tehran was stormed, and 52 Americans were taken hostage. Fueled by the fervor of the Islamic Revolution, young revolutionaries sought to erase decades of American influence in Iran, and, perhaps more deeply, to exact revenge. The U.S. granting asylum to the exiled Shah of Iran only poured gasoline on the fire. Now, under the watchful eye of the global public, America found itself backed into a corner. But the real tragedy wasn't just the hostages themselves. The true catastrophe would come during the attempt to rescue them. Before the operation, where desperation meets pride. Months of fruitless diplomacy left President Jimmy Carter politically paralyzed. Public pressure was mounting. Carter's administration was being branded as weak and indecisive. Meanwhile, the Iranian revolutionaries used the hostages as living symbols. banners of their revolution. The hostage crisis had ceased to be a game of chess and had become a full-blown battle of prestige. Carter turned to a last resort, a secret military operation. Operation Eagle Claw. The plan: ambition in the desert. The rescue would be conducted by Delta Force, America's elite special operations unit. The plan? Infiltrate deep into Iran under the cover of night, storm the location in Tehran where the hostages were held, and extract them. It was an audacious and complex military ballet. Phase 1. 8 RH-53D helicopters would launch from the USS Nimitz and fly to a remote desert landing site inside Iran, codenamed Desert 1. Phase 2. C-130. Hercules aircraft would deliver fuel and personnel to Desert 1, where they would rendezvous with the helicopters. Phase 3. Under cover of darkness, Delta Force would fly into Tehran, raid the embassy, and free the hostages. Final phase: the hostages would be flown back to Desert 1, then out of the country aboard C-130s. The plan required split-second timing and flawless coordination, but nothing went according to plan.
In the middle of Iran's Great Salt Desert.
April 24th, 1980. Operation Eagle Claw. 22:47, first contact at Desert 1. MC-30. Dragon 1 stealthily entered Iranian airspace and landed at Desert 1, a barren makeshift runway in the desert, lit only by infrared beacons visible through night vision goggles. The landing required 4 passes due to poor visibility and the improvised terrain. Once on the ground, the crew deployed road watch teams and Air Force combat controllers to prepare the landing zone. TACAN beacons were set up to guide the incoming helicopters. Civilian interference. The bus and the tanker. While securing the area, U.S. troops encountered unexpected civilian traffic. A bus carrying 43 Iranian civilians was halted and its passengers detained aboard a C-130. Minutes later, a fuel tanker refused to stop and sped toward the site. Rangers fired a shoulder-launched rocket, destroying the tanker in a fiery explosion. The driver leapt out and escaped in an escorting pickup truck. The blast lit up the desert, inadvertently illuminating Desert 1 for the incoming helicopters. 0030. The helicopter nightmare. Of the 8 RH-53D helicopters launched from the USS Nimitz, one aborted early due to mechanical failure. Another, Bluebeard 6, landed in the desert after a cracked rotor blade alert and was abandoned. The remaining helicopters entered a severe dust storm known as a hay-boob. Bluebeard 5 suffered instrument failure and returned to the carrier. 6 helicopters eventually reached Desert 1, but only 5 were flight-ready. One, Bluebeard 2, had a failed hydraulic system. 1 AM disappointment and decision. With only 5 operational helicopters remaining, 1 short of the 6 required, the mission faced collapse. Delta Force Commander Charles Beckwith refused to reduce his team. Senior pilot Seifert refused to fly Bluebeard 2. Aviation Commander Kyle recommended aborting the mission. The abort request was relayed via satellite to Washington. After a 2.5-hour delay, President Carter approved the cancellation.
Sir, to end the mission. As our team was withdrawing after my order to do so, 2 of our American aircraft.
240. Catastrophe. Collision and explosion. As the withdrawal began, disaster struck. Bluebeard 3 attempted a hover taxi maneuver due to terrain constraints. In the thick dust, the pilot lost visual reference and inadvertently drifted forward. The rotor struck the tail of an EC-130 aircraft. The resulting explosion and fireball tore through both aircraft. Only the helicopter's pilot and co-pilot survived. With no time and no safe way to destroy the helicopters, which were loaded with ammunition, the survivors evacuated quickly. 5 intact helicopters were left behind at Desert 1. U.S. troops were airlifted to Masira Island in Oman. Then the wounded were transferred to Germany for treatment. In the burning, wind-whipped desert, American forces abandoned the site, leaving behind bodies, documents, equipment, and broken dreams. Iranian authorities announced the recovery of 8 American bodies at the site. They also claimed a 9th, an Iranian civilian, was among the dead. However, evidence suggests the tanker driver escaped unharmed. Still, 9 coffins were prepared, and Ayatollah Sadegh Khalkhali insisted 9 Americans had died. In reality, 5 USAF aircrew, EC-130, 3 USMC aircrew, RH-53D, totaling 8 confirmed deaths. The bodies were returned to the U.S. on May 6, 1980, and buried in different locations across the country. The 44 civilians from the bus were later released. Their testimonies were used in Iranian media to dramatize the event, depicting the Americans as invaders who stormed in, detained civilians, and left in flames. It became a tool of psychological warfare, a narrative of divine intervention and American humiliation. Iran's response: a parade of victory. The next morning, Iranian state television broadcast dramatic images: scorched helicopters, torn American flags, boots scattered in the sand, classified maps left behind. Streets in Tehran filled with mock parades. Burned helicopter replicas were wheeled through the crowd. Puppet soldiers marched in ridicule. It was more than a failed rescue. It was a national humiliation broadcast live to the world. Carter's popularity plummeted. The American public craved stronger leadership. Ronald Reagan won the 1980 election in a landslide. And the hostages? They were only released 444 days later, on the very day Reagan was sworn in. The 1979 to 1980 Iran hostage crisis and Operation Eagle Claw were more than a failed rescue. They marked one of the clearest ruptures in the myth of American invincibility. Though the operation involved no direct Iranian interference, the failure handed Iran a psychological and media victory of global proportions. It was not a military triumph, but an information war victory, a symbol of defiance and a story of American embarrassment. This victory was not when Iran defeated the U.S. in war. But it was, perhaps, one of the moments in modern history when America knelt, not to force, but to its own miscalculation.